Great. Well, thank you so much for attending today's webinar. We are so thrilled to have you all joining us virtually right before the holiday season. My name is Madison Garzoli, and I'm the Director of Membership and International Programs at Sonoma County Vintners. I'm so honored to introduce you all to our fabulous partners at Exchange Bank. But before I make that introduction, I just wanted to address a few housekeeping items. Number one, this webinar is recorded, and we will be posting this to our YouTube Scion playlist channel. We will also be posting it to our website and sending out an email at the end of this series with all the recordings of all of our webinars for the Planning for 2022 session. Secondly, if you have any questions or comments or areas that you'd like to kind of refocus on during the presentation, please direct those comments and questions into the chat. We'll be monitoring them during the presentation, and there's actually going to be some designated times to address those questions. So we have two wonderful representatives from Exchange Bank. We have Summer and Dave, who are going to take you through this presentation about the CalSavers program and retirement solutions for your business and employees. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Summer.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Exchange, we're going to be providing to you with some very valuable information that affects all of you on the call. And that is about the new California CalSavers program and what that means to your business, because this is going to affect everyone between 5 employees and up, and then help you kind of figure out what is the best solution and next steps. So just a little introduction first. I want to introduce you to Dave Rappaport, who is our Vice President of Investment Officer, who is going to be presenting these amazing details. Dave, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning, folks. Dave Rappaport from Exchange Bank, the Trust Department. I've been at this for many decades. CalSavers is something new, but hopefully what we've got for you today will make it a little easier to understand. And as you implement it, if you need any additional input, just contact us.
And I'm Summer Jeffis, the Regional Business Development Officer. Many of you know me from my 20 years in the wine industry, both launching brands and bringing them into the black. So I specialize in agriculture, wine, and the restaurant industry. So when this new CalSavers came up and we know our community, we know that this is important to be ahead of and perfect timing to start planning for 2022. So what we're going to actually be covering is the new California Savers program. So we're going to go over what is best for you, as this is a state law and the deadline is June 20th, 2022, that requires all California employees with 5 or more to either maintain an employee-sponsored retirement plan, and we're going to go over that more, or to participate in this new California State Savers program. So Dave, who is with our Trust and Investment Management Group, is going to review what that program is on behalf of the state, and then help you determine the retirement solutions that's best for your business, because you have a few options here. So we're going to go over what the CalSavers program is. We're going to do the pros and cons of what that looks like. And then just a little bit about us, in case you haven't known. Everyone knows the Exchange Bank name. But what you probably didn't realize, besides that we were founded in 1890 in Santa Rosa and have 17 branches stretching all the way from Sonoma County to Roseville, and a trust department that is very robust in Silicon Valley. So we do our loans, we specialize in agriculture, of course, we do the banking and checking. And if you got a PPP loan this year or last year, chances are we were one of them, maybe potentially helped you, as we are the largest SBA or Small Business Administration loan administrator. But what people don't know is about our Trusted Investment Group. Dave, you want to tell everyone a little bit about that, and then we'll get into about the CalSavers?
Sure. As you mentioned, the bank dates from 1890. The trust department was created in 1963, so it's almost 60 years old. Again, the whole idea was to give people a broader array of financial services and hopefully make them customers for life. Today, we've got a 1.4 billion in assets, offices in 3 major locations. Outside Sonoma County, we've also got Roseville and Silicon Valley, and a staff of 28 that do nothing but this. Combined experience is something like 250 years. In addition to working with retirement plans, our topic today, we do a lot of estate settlement, personal trust administration for folks that leave money in trust for a relative or a child when they pass away. We also manage money for nonprofits and endowment funds.
Yeah, so we actually service a lot in Sonoma County and abroad, and that's what makes us the 5th largest community bank trust department in California, which is pretty impressive. Well, let's get into why we're really here today, and it's about these retirement plans and these new laws that's going to affect all businesses, majority of. So first, let's start at a 30,000 feet level, retirement plans as a whole, and what is best for the business and the employee's future. So why do we have retirement plans? Well, like any of us, this is to help our employees save for the future. Now, what's really important for a business, and especially in this climate where we're having a hard time finding good staff, having a retirement plan really is a great tool to attract quality employees and build that loyalty with them. And as a reward for that of helping these employees, the state also gives us great tax advantages as well to your business. So some of those tax advantages, and just something to think about as we're going forward, is most employers can deduct those contributions that they're made towards their retirement plans. And what that really means is that the employer's retirement plan or taxable income for the year actually goes down and actually provides a real advantage for you. So that's why we like to do it. Both it's for the employee, attracting your employees, because the best employees make the best business to represent you, and you're rewarded on taxes. But so why now is there this new California employee retirement laws? So currently right now, employers generally are not required to offer their employees retirement benefits. So this tends to be a perk that some employers tend to do. Well, to try to balance that and looking into the future for employees that they're not saving as much as they should be, they're implementing a new state law. And that is that all California employers with 5 or more employees will either maintain an employee-sponsored retirement plan, and again, we'll get into more depth with that, or they need to participate in the California State CalSavers program. So by June 20th, 2022, if you have 5 or more employees, you're going to be required to either maintain an employee-sponsored retirement plan or participate in the CalSavers program. If you have 50 or more employees right now, you've actually already missed that deadline and are required to register right now. So what is this program? It's state overseen. It's privately administrated Roth IRA option for workers in the private sector, again, who do not already have an employee-sponsored retirement plan in place. The employee participates, it's completely voluntary, and they opt in and out at any time. However, as the employer, you're going to make sure that they're opt-in to begin with, and then they have to make the decision. This is 100% funded by the employee. So this is their savings account. So for you as the employer, there's no fees or contributions on your behalf. Now, there's only 2 exceptions that you don't have to participate in this, is that if you have fewer than 5 employees, then you don't have to participate and you're not it's not mandatory for you to have an employee-sponsored retirement. And if you already have that company sponsored plan in place, then just maintain it. So what are the benefits of having this California Savers program? Well, it's a limited employer role. So there's no fees to the employer to facilitate this program, and you have no fiduciary responsibility. You're simply going to be uploading the employee information to CalSavers on their website. And then you're going to submit the participating employees' contributions to CalSavers via payroll deduction. So again, this is all going to be from the employee deducting from their paycheck. You just have to report it. They're going to start at 5% of the gross pay, and it automatically actually escalates up to 8% over the next 3 years. If you've missed the deadline, you already have 50 employees or more right now, and you've missed that deadline, and some of our clients are already experiencing this, is that the state will notify the employer of non-compliance. So you're going to get a letter. After 90 days, if you are still not complying, then they're going to actually start servicing you with penalties of $250 per eligible employee, and it actually goes up from there. So we've actually included a link for you to dive in a little bit more about the CalSavers program. So that's the Cal Savers program. We're going to transition over to Dave. He's going to talk about employee sponsored, and then we're actually going to look at the pros and cons and help you make the right decision for your business and customize it. Dave, tell us a little bit more what an employee sponsored retirement plan looks like.
Again, there are two basic types of retirement plans. One, the defined benefit plan, or as some people know it simply as a pension plan, is one where the employer in effect takes care of everything. It's done based on salary, years of service. There's a formula involved. There's an actuarial calculation. The funding's done by the employer, the obligations on the employer. You typically don't see those much in private corporations anymore, mostly in the public sector. And again, these days, one of the difficulties in any of those plans is building enough time to develop a pension. It's really a longevity issue. And if you work for a lot of different employers, you're probably not going to build up a big pension in any one of them. The defined contribution plan, on the other hand, the most common of which is the 401k, is what a lot of employers have gone to starting back in the 1980s. There, in effect, you don't have a pension at the end, but you do own the money in the account. And again, the money can go in either through employee deferrals, pre-tax or after-tax, Roth as it's called, as well as company matching or company profit sharing contributions. And again, what's the benefit? Why does the government support the private pension system? Historically, because they'd like to have employees rely on something other than just Social Security. And the sweetener, obviously, down through the years has been, as Summer referred to earlier, tax deductions, both for the amount of money you put in the plan and for the costs you incur administering the plan.
Well, let's dive down a little bit on the more common ones. And by the way, at the end of this presentation, we will be sending you this PowerPoint deck for you to refer later, because this is a lot of information.
Again, 401ks, employer sponsored. Workers can save some of the income pre-tax. That's what's called traditional. Some of the plans also allow you to put in money after tax, Roth, which is, again, how the Cal Savers program is set up, although it's an IRA, not a pension plan. Again, on the traditional program, no taxes taken out until the money is withdrawn. And most plans allow you to what they call self-select and invest your own funds based on the menu that the employer has gone over. An IRA, on the other hand, which a lot of folks can set up on their own, anybody can have one, as long as you've got earned income, is your own individual account. Again, they're both traditional, meaning you might put in money pre-tax and deduct it in the year that you contribute it, so it's not taxable, or Roth, where you put in the money after tax. But if you wait at least 5 years and reach age 59 and a half, everything, both what you put in and all the earnings, come out tax-free. And then one that you see a little less often, but sometimes works in small businesses, is what's called a SEP, or Simplified Employee Pension, which is in effect a company provided IRA. Again, the limits are higher than what you would get with the Cal Savers program. The drawback is, in many cases, you've got to cover everybody who's going to earn at least $650 or more. So even part-time folks are going to be included, and you'll have to set up an IRA for every one of them. Also, there's nothing to prevent the employees from cashing out of the IRAs as soon as you fund them. So it's not a situation where you're requiring somebody to save for retirement. You're simply creating a funding vehicle that the employee then has control of.
So Dave, coming from the wine industry, I know, and I know you on this call, wear many hats during the day to make your business run. So I think this is probably one of the best slides of that high level for us to understand all of that. What's anything you really want to point out about this when we're comparing an employee sponsored retirement plan, and then at the bottom here on this chart, there's the Cal Savers?
Yeah, well, again, we suggested that when this comes out, since you did just such a nice job with the color, that you slip it in one of those clear protective sheets and have it as a placemat or a wall hanging, so that all the key numbers and the check marks are easily available. Unquestionably, with a 401k, as you can see, the limits are much higher. When the employer sponsors the plan, the IRS allows you to do a lot more, but of course, with that comes some fiduciary liability, and depending on how much the employer can afford to put in, those plans can be a very attractive benefit. In the IRA category, and I meaning individual, where in effect people have their own individual accounts, they're not part of a sponsored corporate plan. The Roth IRA, which you've got indicated here, is after-tax money. It's currently capped at $6,000, as is the traditional IRA. And again, the benefit is for the long term. This is supposed to be a forced savings situation, although if people access the money earlier, there will be some penalties in some situations, or at least if you take out the Roth portion, no taxes, but obviously you're not building for your future retirement. Cal Savers, since it matches the Roth IRA, is a situation where, again, rather than have the individual set it up through a bank or a mutual fund company, the state's facilitating, the state's not investing the money, but the money goes to the state, then goes out to the firms that they've contracted with and oversee. And at that point, the individual is going to have to stay involved and both make investment choices as well as keep the state informed of his location or her location if they change positions.
Okay, so now that we've talked about Cal Savers and we've talked about employee-sponsored plans, and I know everyone on this call is thinking, what position am I in? Will you go over the pros and the cons of Cal Savers? So what are the pros and the cons of Cal Savers? And then let's talk about the pros and the cons of an employee-sponsored plan.
Yeah, this is a very important sheet because obviously it's Cal Savers that is the mandated program here, and everybody on the call needs to understand how to navigate it. You mentioned earlier, one of the ways they sold this in the legislature was to say, you know, it's a mandated, sure, but the employer, which is a small company in most cases, has got more things to do than they have people to do them, doesn't have to do a lot of work. Well, that's not really true. You do obviously have to call the state and register. You will have to upload employee information and payroll deductions. Although there are no fees, and you're not a fiduciary in this case, meaning you don't have liability for loss of money or even loss in the transmission of money, I would suggest, based on my own research and also talking to the state recently, that you at least, number one, download the state's brochure so that you have someplace where there's information you can refer to. And then I would for sure download copies, or plural copies, of both the opt-out form and the opt-in form. Because if employees know that they can opt out, many of them will. That saves you some trouble. Many of the employees don't realize if they don't do anything, 3 years from now, 8% of their pay is going to be deducted with no tax deduction. And for some of them, that may be a heavy lift. Also, even though you're not allowed to advocate for or against the program, if people ask you questions and you just say, go to the state's website, or here's an 800 number to call, that may not be the culture of your firm. It's a small firm. People talk, they don't put off people that say, you know, this is not my program, but the state requires it, but I'm not supposed to do anything about it. I would have the forms necessary to opt out. I would have the form necessary to opt in, let the employee choose. The negatives, obviously, on the other side here are that the employee doesn't have much control here regarding financial opportunities. The investment set is limited. They're trying to sort of dumb it down a little bit and make sure nobody stubs their toe. The employer can't do any matching. There's no employer money in at all. So if you're profitable and are looking for a way to put some of your profits in a tax-deferred vehicle, Cal Savers can't help you. The limits are lower than obviously you saw on that sheet previously. You could put anywhere up to $20,500 in the upcoming year in a pre-tax or Roth 401k, but you can't do that in the IRA. Also, there's no fiduciary protection. As it said on the other side of the slide, there's no liability, but there's also no protection. So in most cases, if you have a problem in an employer plan, there are folks you can go after, folks that are legally required to have a bond. The employer is the fiduciary. In this case, if there's a slip up, if somebody doesn't make a transfer correctly, there isn't anybody. The federal pension law in effect doesn't protect you in the Cal Savers plan. The other thing that I would say as a con, it relates to my comment earlier, if you opt out, you can either go online, a paper form, or call the state. But I'm getting calls already from folks in similar situations who say some of my employees don't have the internet, or they want to come in and use the company computer to opt out. I would definitely have those paper forms because again, in researching what the other states are doing, Oregon, just to the north of us, in the first couple of years, they have had a 2/3 opt-out rate and a first year's accumulation of only about $850. So these plans are not having a huge financial impact. And in fact, the majority of employees are opting out. So if for you, that's the easy way at the beginning, obviously they can opt in later on. You're doing yourself a favor if you have that one-page form available. So if the employee says, I don't know, what about this? What about that? You say, look, if you opt out, you can opt in later on. Opting in is a 3-page form. If you opt out for all your employees, and you got, say, 5 or 6 employees, you're clear for the time being. I would just monitor, if you hire somebody new, they've got to be offered the same opportunity. But in this case, you're being even-handed about it. You've got the ability to have somebody opt out easily or opt in easily, and yet you don't have to advocate one way or the other.
Great, thanks, Dave. So that's the CalSavers pros and cons, and it definitely sounds like there's pros and cons, but let's talk about employee sponsored, because especially if you're really on the cusp of doing employee sponsored, this is going to be mandated no matter what, whether it be CalSavers or not, and you're thinking about tax advantages and you need good employees and this is where you want to go. What's some of the pros and cons for the employee sponsored plan?
Well, as we've mentioned earlier, and that always gets folks' attention, whether it's individual or for a business, the federal government has always supported the private pension system with tax breaks. The last time I looked, this is just off the top of my head, but I follow this stuff day in and day out. The tax deferrals into IRAs and 401ks, the last time I checked, cost the government about $65 billion a year in tax revenue. And again, unless you're talking billions in Washington, you're a rounding error, but that's a lot of money. So in effect, the IRS and the Department of Labor are foregoing, in this case, a lot of money in order to encourage employers to have plans. As you mentioned earlier, there's probably no time like the present to have employers consider how difficult it is to find the employees they want and then keep them. A lot of turnover as people start looking for another few bucks or another benefit at another employer, especially if it's within a reasonable commuting distance. The other thing that's very attractive about 401ks is there's very little restriction on what you can invest in. If anything, you probably want to keep employees from speculating, but in effect, the ability to build a broad, diversified menu is a lot bigger than you would get with a CalSavers program, which again is sort of skinny down and dumbed down to make it as easy to work with as possible. Another thing you can do with an employer plan, and this goes back to the second bullet point, is you can control how long an employee, up to a point, how long an employee has to work there before they're eligible. Whereas CalSavers, everybody that's been there 90 days either has to opt out or you're sending some of their money to the state. With your own plan, you could also control vesting, which says in effect, if the employer puts in some matching money or some profit sharing money, I can use the old golden handcuffs and in some cases structure it out to 6 years before the employee earns, if they leave, all the money that the company has put in. That allows you in effect to focus the contributions on longer term employees and take some back from employees who have earned it but have not been there long enough to take it all. Another feature that, again, the government doesn't want to see people use, but is very important when you're asking somebody if they're willing to defer some of their pay into a retirement account, is how do I access the money in an emergency? And the answer here, in many cases, is you can take a loan with no tax implications as long as you pay the loan back the same way you put money into your account, which is through the payroll system. Now, as an example, Maryland's about to start a program like CalSavers next year, and theirs is structured a little differently in that they want people to have a savings account before they even start putting money into their retirement account. I don't know how it's going to work, but that in effect reflects the fact that for many employees at lower income levels, one of the first things they think about, or should, is if I'm in a jam financially, how do I get money out? With a plan, obviously, you could allow loans, and they don't have any tax consequences as long as you pay them back. The other thing too, obviously, is that the employee contribution limits are higher. And frankly, since the employer contribution to Cal Savers is zero, if you are profitable or looking to put profits into the plan, that's something you can do with your own plan you couldn't do with a state plan.
So
Yeah.
Dave, what's some of the cons? And then let's, what are some of the cons? It sounds like there's a lot of advantages here.
Yeah, it's not all good, obviously. First of all, plans aren't free. And since there's going to have to be some inside knowledge to work with vendors, if you don't have somebody who is at least an all-purpose office manager that can upload payrolls or at least work with your administrative vendors, it's going to be difficult. These things don't run themselves. It's not going to be as simple as just remitting a piece of somebody's paycheck to the state. So there are costs. The offsetting benefits of the costs are many of them, the build costs at least, rather than the embedded ones, can be deducted as well as the contributions you make to the plan. The other issue is something that's missing in Cal Savers, which is as an employer, you have some fiduciary liability regarding overseeing the vendors that you choose. I don't think any of the employers we're dealing with here should worry about the possibility of lawsuits like large employers have to. But there is a fiduciary responsibility here, a liability that requires you to meet with your vendors periodically, verify that you're not being overcharged, have them review your investment menu so that in effect, they own responsibility for it, not you. So there is more work involved in order to, number one, have a program that attracts employees, and number two, allows you to access some of the tax benefits if you can use them.
Perfect. So I think this is a great time for you to go through these kind of questions that anyone should be, when they're considering doing an employee-sponsored plan and setting up, what are the questions that we should be asking ourselves as a business in consideration?
Absolutely. Although 401ks, when they first came out, sounded great, nobody realized that there were a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross, according to IRS regulations. The plans themselves started in the early 80s. The IRS hadn't even touched up the regulations on them until the early 90s. So it is sort of a work in progress. And if you're going to have one, these are serious undertakings. It's just like, you wouldn't offer your employees typically healthcare benefits one year and then withdraw them the next. You can't turn a retirement plan that's government authorized, that is tax qualified. You can't turn it on or off year to year like a light switch. So the kinds of things I would ask myself internally and my partners if I had some in a business, first of all, is the company consistently profitable? Because since you can't just walk away from your plan during a spate of unprofitable years, you are creating something that is expected to be ongoing. Another issue is how stable is your workforce? Now, we saw earlier when we were looking at the pros, we can do some things to cut down on the impact of an unstable workforce. So for example, things like eligibility and vesting, you could control to a point. But if in effect you have a very unstable workforce, it may not be worth the trouble if you're constantly cycling people in and out. There's going to be some administrative work for your in-house staff. The third bullet.
I was going to say, so Dave, what you're saying, and coming from the wine industry, if you have mainly full-time employees, this is probably a good plan. Now, if say you're a caterer and you have a lot of seasonal part-time employees, maybe this isn't a good fit. Or just think about just the full-time employees. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. We've had, in fact, in our own experience doing 401ks regionally here, we have a catering company. We've had one for years. Again, they have so much turnover, so many college kids, coming from Berkeley or Cal State Hayward or whatever, but they only work a summer. They work 2 summers or 3 summers at the most, and they're out. That kind of turnover means the plan doesn't grow. It doesn't get any of the benefits of scale that you would expect as your plan assets grow. And it's in some cases maybe a reason why Cal Savers might make more sense for you, assuming the employees want to do it.
Or Dave, it sounds like that's where you get to put in you need to be working here for a year before we invest in you in a sponsored retirement plan. It sounds like you can put those checks and balances in.
Correct. Perfect. Again, that speaks to plan design, but it's one of the things you'd want to think about now, because if the shoe fits on some of these key issues, then you got to think, okay, then what are the offsetting things that I could do to deal with what might be a drawback? Are there some things we can do to make this work, or should we just take the state solution?
Okay. What other things should we consider?
One, obviously, and I referenced it earlier because I had a phone call from one of our branches where an employee came in and he had a language issue because English wasn't his first language. He also didn't have access to the internet. And do you want employees coming in and asking you to either help them with investment issues or dealing with the state or dealing with your vendor if you have a 401k plan? So since virtually all the programs today have this, again, as you referred to how bountiful some of these programs are in terms of resources, a lot of it is because of the internet. So if employees don't have access to it or aren't internet savvy, in effect, they can't interact with their accounts and get as much out of them as they could. And you can't simply say, go online and do this or go online and do that because they can't. So that's an issue you've got to size up internally. Or do you have a terminal in the office where you'd be willing to let employees use it in order to get access that they don't have at home? The last bullet point really relates to the first. If you are consistently profitable, are you ready to put some of those profits into the retirement plan, both for the employee's benefit and for the benefit of management? Because for folks that are in the upper income ranges and can afford to, the cap goes as high as 27,000 of pre-tax in 2022. So for many employees, or for many of the higher paid employees, that's an attractive savings opportunity and tax deferral opportunity. But in some cases, the company's going to have to put in extra money in the plan in order to reach it and meet the IRS requirements for broad participation. So if these bullets look like they work for you, then you may be a candidate for a company plan and have a new aspect of benefits to offer your employees.
Perfectly said. So you're sitting here right now and you're going, yes, I am consistently profitable. Yes, I have stable workforce. Yes, I have the ability to do some in-house administration, as we all wear many hats within the wine industry. The majority of people have internet now, in case you're a handful, and you're ready to take some advantages of, with your profits. It sounds like the direction you want to go. And I want to revert you back to the table mat and the jokativeness, but the seriousness of laminating this. And maybe pause for a second, see if anyone has some questions on the consideration as you're self-evaluating and deciding maybe employer sponsorship, or employee sponsor plan might be the way to go instead of CalSavers. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them. I actually have one question that came through. And Dave, this is for you. Can a business contribute to a CalSavers program? So if they decide not to do employee sponsored and they do the CalSavers, do they have the ability then to say contribute to their retirement?
No. This is strictly employees deferring their own pay or agreeing to have their own pay deferred. You can't match it or put in a profit sharing contribution.
Perfect. That's a great question. And I think that's what it really refers to is when you're planning this, it sounds like long term. What are the tax advantages? CalSavers sounds it's easy, but it's limited just the way most things are. And then these other pieces. Any other questions that we might have? Oh, looks like we've got one more. What is the deadlines again of the CalSavers program? So the deadlines again, 5 employees or more, June 20th, 2022, and that's coming up. If you have 50 employees or more, that deadline is already come and gone, and you're going to need to make some bigger decisions. So let's go ahead and move forward on those bigger decisions. So say you've pre-qualified yourself that you want to do employee sponsored, and maybe CalSaver is a little too limited for your business and what your goals are, both in maintaining employees and business growth. Dave, what's some of those questions that you should be asking when you're then vetting for an employee-sponsored partner?
I just wanted to go back based on the previous question. I thought I'd add a little cherry on top here to your whipped cream there. One of the things that I would certainly do based on the deadlines, as you indicated, this was a 3-year rollout. And they started with large plan sponsors. Well, as you would expect, large plan sponsors typically have their own retirement plans and have not had to use CalSavers. On the other hand, as this walks down and we're in the 3rd year, as you get to smaller and smaller employers, the data show that more smaller employers don't have plans. And this was really in effect meant to cover them. So although it was easy to get to CalSavers now, and I had to have a chat with some of their staff, the last couple of years have been mostly deadlines for employers that it doesn't apply. Once we're down to the group now down to 5, and we're in the last 6 or 7 months of that, there are going to be a lot more calls because these are the folks who in the main don't have plans. So again, I would go back to my earlier suggestion. I would get in touch with the state now before there's a deluge of calls in the late spring. Number 2, I would download their basic brochure, and incidentally, there's information available, I think, in 10 languages the last time I counted. Then I would certainly have the opt-out form, so you have it in your office. That may be the easiest way to make your workload light. And I would also, for balance, have the opt-in form for people that change their minds later on. If you've got any questions, this would be the time to ask them. I didn't have a long wait. Many of you have probably been in situations where, whether it's seasonal or for whatever reason, you call a toll-free line and the message will come on and say your wait time is about 15, 20, 30 minutes. I had virtually no wait time to get to state employees last month, but I don't think that's going to be the case as we get closer to the deadline that some were indicated on that previous slide.
Right.
So I would,
Dave,
before we
great
jump on that,
point.
I would do that.
Great point. So this is what this webinar is for you to make that early decision of what direction you want to go in. And so as you're making that decision, and we're, if you want to move forward with employee-sponsored retirement plans. So again, what are those questions that we should be asking when they're starting to vet who they want to go with? CalSavers is too limited. I want to do employee-sponsored. How do I start finding a business, and what questions should I be asking?
If you're going to start shopping, obviously you need to start thinking about that vendor relationship. One of the key issues, a differentiator for us, but most common in the small end of the market, is broker sold product. We go direct, but obviously one of the things you want to determine is, am I working with someone that adds a lot of value, or is it just a third party? In many cases, you can get a 401k, for example, from the same person that brings you your group insurance or medical or whatever. But in effect, if they're simply a go-between, that may be more costly than if you can find some direct sources, and they're out there. That, of course, means you've got to find out what do they do and what are you going to be required to do? What services are included? What are the fees? Most people should be able to give you a print of that rather than discuss them in theory. How much do the employees pay? In effect, by law, you could lay it all on the employees, or you could pay some of it yourself. And again, things you pay are tax deductible, but you may want to obviously scope that out and build yourself a spreadsheet ahead of time. Again, one of the ways that you can make your program more effective is through employee education and investment advice. If in effect you're dealing with third parties that don't do that, but you're paying them, your costs are going to be higher. You may, and I certainly wouldn't be embarrassed to ask each vendor, what do they have in the way of investment education, assuming that the employees are going to get some time either on site, or would they meet with employees off site and help them get the most out of the program? Because again, employees in these programs will have to make their own investment decisions. And it's nice if you've got folks that can help, at least in broad brushstrokes, identify the key definitions that they're going to be working with, and give them some feedback regarding what they might expect given various investment strategies.
So Dave, really well said. And I'm going to put my winery cap back on for my previous life. I would literally print up the slide and have it ready when I'm vetting 2 to 3 retirement plans and see what their different answers are for sure. And I think the employee education is a really good part. I think that's what us local, and I'm just going to brag about you, Dave, a little bit, in your department, is they're very good at providing that employee education, as what we are doing right now on behalf of the Sonoma Vintners. I think we've learned through the PPP program, if you went through it, some of these bigger entities, they're harder to get a hold of, they're harder to customize for you, they're harder to help provide you that extra. When you're tight on staff time, bandwidth, it's a real benefit. So I just want to stress before we move forward that working with a local entity, and as you're vetting them, is really going to serve you well. And they have experienced staff in this area. So great example us at Exchange when we're working with our trusts. A lot of them are wineries, so we know the ebbs and flows of what you need to do. Great example, as I'm working on some loans, I know that many of you right now have your bottles strapped on cargo ships and waiting to bottle. And what does that look like? And make it look forward. So that helps us in our local decision making. So I think a big thing that Dave stressed is really, is it a broker or are you going direct? Are you going to get the help that you need? So use these slides as kind of a platform for you to help. So with that, we want to open it up to questions. Dave, so I have another question here that just came through. If a company has a sponsored plan already, do the employees still need to opt out of the CalSavers?
No, you're exempt. If you've got a company sponsored plan now, you're exempt.
Perfect. If an employee, I'm just going to read off of here. If an employer still has a sponsored plan, where should I look to start reevaluating if even the employee sponsored plan is the best fit for my business?
Again, I want to understand the question. Are you saying that the question is, if I already have a plan, how do I
They
evaluate
already
it?
have a plan. Where
Right.
should I look to evaluate if I have the best plan in place for my business? And I think what they're referring to is this chart, seeing that there's so many different options and kind of a la carte for an employee sponsored plan. Where do they need to kind of look to go, maybe I need to kind of tweak some things with an employee sponsored plan that I already have? Or how do I look to see if I actually have a broker rather than a direct person?
Well, that's a good question. Let's just stay on the top blue band there, because that's where we do most of our business. If you got into a plan, and I'm talking to an employer right now, we've had a dialogue going on for a bit, and they said, you know, we first just wanted to get this thing going. We went to a broker. The broker brought in somebody else. And, you know, the main thing was to get it up and running. It was supposed to be plug and play, but we don't know what it costs, which really isn't good. I mean, you know what everything costs when you're dealing with other vendors. Why do you not know what your retirement plan costs? And we really don't know how to benchmark the investments we've got or any of the other services. That's where, you know, we'll be glad to give you a consultation. You should know what your costs are, because again, the slide mentioned earlier, you have a legal liability to know that they're reasonable. At least that's the government term. And reasonable obviously is a benchmarking issue. It's not what is the absolute lowest cost at any point in time. Is it reasonable given what's available in the market and what you're trying to do? But if you don't know what your costs are, if you're not sure what all your relationships are, and the guy I'm talking to has 4 different players circulating rather than just dealing with one, which would be like us, I said, we probably ought to sit down and, you know, take a look at what you're doing, work up your costs if you don't know how to do it. Some of them are based on insurance contracts or investment prospectuses. They're not in hard dollar amounts that are easy to see. I would just suggest for your own, you know, good business practices, do with it what you do with your other vendor relationships, which is, you know, hold it up to the light, see what you're paying, see what else is out there. Maybe you could offer that same benefit for less, or use some of that money to make it a better benefit.
Here's another great question for you. If I go with a 401k through Exchange Bank, do we still need to have a third-party administrator and a sequential fees? Right now, that is pretty expensive.
Our program, we partner with a national third-party administration firm, just because many employers don't like the idea of dealing with 2 or 3 different entities. We're the front office. Nobody deals with the back office on the TPA. So in effect, we unify that. But in effect, if you've got a TPA you like, we can work with them. But in many cases, we can save money and save relationships. That's cut the hassle factor by unifying everything together. The other thing that you should be aware of is there are 2 basic types of TPAs, or third-party administrators. One is referred to as a producing TPA, which is industry speak for saying that they're also acting as a broker, which means that they're getting a cut of your asset base from the insurance company typically, or the fund company that's got the assets, in addition to what they're billing you. I've had some real eye-opening discussions, you know, focusing on the numbers with some clients who didn't realize that their TPAs were getting paid from 2 directions. So one of the things you want to do, obviously, is see what does the TPA really cost, both directly and indirectly, And can you skinny that down to your own benefit?
So just to confirm the answer, Dave, they would not need to have a third-party administrator if they went through Exchange because we do it direct.
We can go either way. We can work with somebody else, or we
So
can
they would
take care
not
of it.
need to, if they wanted
Yeah.
to, but it sounds like what they're asking is it's pretty
Yeah.
expensive. If we go with someone with Exchange, we no longer have to have that third fee and we can actually save money.
Correct. And so one phone call, and you're always going to be dealing with a bank employee, not someone who's not part of our fiduciary operation.
Perfect. And again, that's one of those great questions
It is.
to ask yourself is this a direct relationship or are you going through a broker? Great questions. What I want to put out there as we conclude this is we are here to answer any questions as we are a supporting member of the Sonoma Vintners. That's what we're here for, as a resource for the community, whether you're with us or not. We're here to provide information for you. So we hopefully this provided you with a lot of great information on helping you make decisions for your employees and yourself as a business with these new laws and retirement. And just remember that Exchange Bank has an amazing, robust trust department. And of course, we're here to support the community, both in loans and your local checking accounts, and of course, contribute to the community. With that, thank you very much for having us. We will be sending out an email of this deck for you to digest it a little bit more and use it as a roadmap for you to help make better decisions in the future for investments of your employees. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.